Richard Ford has been hailed as one of the finest curators of the American Living Museum. In setting, types of characters, plots, point of view, and perhaps most importantly, in ever-broadening sympathy, he's consciously kept moving on. From the funny, wise and immensely likeable Frank Bascombe from The Sports Writer and its sequels, to the drifters and dreamers that populate his short stories, to the young and old Del Parsons who narrates Canada, Richard Ford has created some of the most affecting and memorable characters in recent American fiction. Just taking a few breaths now. He's won numerous awards and accolades and is the only writer ever to win the PEN/Faulkner Award and the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in the same year for Independence Day. Charles McGrath, a deputy editor at The New Yorker, where two of the stories in Richard Ford's breakthrough collection, Rock Springs, initially appeared, said of him as a potential model for young writers, "The recipe for his stories is resistant to imitation, but I'd be surprised if it didn't start to happen." Well, I'm here to tell you that it did indeed start to happen because I was one such writer, at least in my earlier awkward beginnings. 25 years ago, I read one of those stories in Rock Springs, a story called Empire, and it absolutely bowled me over. And my feelings towards it are perfectly captured by Richard Ford himself talking about his friend Raymond Carver's story, Are These Actual Miles? This life, Ford says, these otherwise unnoticeable people's suitability for literary expression seemed new. Here was no ponderous naturalism, nothing extra. There were barely the rudiments of realism. This was highly stylised, artistic writing with life, not art, as its subject. And to be exposed to it was to be bowled over. And that's exactly how I felt. And I can show you, if you're lucky enough to be sitting in the front row, exactly how bowled over I was. This is the book that I read Empire in, and I studied it until the pages literally fell out. There is a picture of Richard Ford some 25 years ago. Still as handsome today. And I studied and reread that story, marking up and parsing every sentence, examining the felicitous employment of an unexpected word, feeling the pauses and noises and rhythms in the hope of unlocking some Gnostic power of expression. I'd never read anything like it, and it literally changed my life. It wasn't that it made me want to become a writer. That regrettable inclination was already well established, but it made me believe that I could become one, which I eventually did. And in researching my second book, I would need to spend quite a bit of time driving through America, from top to bottom all the way down to New Orleans. And with that destination in mind, I decided to take a chance. What the hell? Why don't I write a letter to Richard Ford and ask about dropping by for a chat? And I didn't hold much hope for a reply, and was therefore very surprised to receive this handwritten postcard. You can pass it. I'd pass it round if there was an orchestra here to pass it, but there's not. It's from Post Office Box 367, Chinook, Montana, August 1996. Dear Mr. Condon, too bad for me, but I'll miss you. New Orleans is not for me in August or September. I'm in Montana. If you travel this way, do call 406-357-2168. And thank you for your kind words about Empire. I always liked it myself. An odd length. I actually first imagined it on a train ride to see Ray Carver in New York State. Hope your trip is happy. Maybe I'll meet you somewhere. And so here we are, somewhere. And I'm very pleased to meet at last Richard Ford. Well, that was seamless.
It makes me feel good, though, because I always think that when young writers write to me that I'm quick to write them back.
Yeah, well, indeed you were. To offer up your phone number and the invitation to come and see you in Montana, it's remarkable.
Well, it's just, I'm from the South, you know. I'm from the South, and so we're taught to be polite.
I presume that phone number's no longer good, though.
That phone number is defunct. But it was not defunct then. That would have been really... a cruel thing to do.
Oh, I'm sorry we never made it. Although it makes this. Thank you. We need a roadie. All the more felicitous, I think. Now, I'll just point out to the audience that I've never done anything like this. Richard's quite a professional at it.
I have done this. I have interviewed several writers, I have. I think it's one of the...
We can swap it around if you'd like.
It's fine. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, I've handily divided my questions up into a series of topics. You could choose one if you like. We could choose from Canada, life itself, the Vanity Fair Proust questionnaire, movies.
Column B.
Was that life itself?
Life itself.
Really?
Well, we'll start it on life itself. That's good enough.
Yeah, that's
Start ad hominem.
That's a get to know you kind of topic. The other topic was, of course, writing.
Well, all right, then column E.
We'll get to writing, I'm
all
sure.
Right.
We'll get to Canada as well. The publicists will like that. You're healthy enough to play squash twice a week. You're still married,
yes.
42 years.
Yes.
The mixed bounty of success is still very much a part of your life.
Still mixed.
Yeah. What's bothering you?
God, you went right to the big dollar questions. What's bothering me?
There doesn't have.
Well, I have an old dog who's 14. It bothers me that he might not be around much longer. Probably that you were hoping for something more Nabokovian, but that's pretty much it right now.
No, that's a good level of bother.
I hurt my shoulder today too.
You still have a very firm handshake. Well, if you could choose one question never to be asked again, what would it be?
To talk about dirty realism.
Yeah.
That would be the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, of course, very much typified by that Granter book that I held up before.
Or tell me what your novel is about, Mr. Ford. That's the one. That's another showstopper for me. I just don't answer that one.
No. Read it.
That's what I always say. I hear have to happen to have one.
Yeah.
Right here.
And kind of why I wrote it.
Yeah, it was.
You've said that literary friendships are a complex, tricky business, frequently volatile, often impurely understood by their core participants. Would you like to tell us about some of your literary friendships?
Literary friendships. Well, you mentioned Ray. Ray was, I was in love with Ray. Ray was just the sweetest, dearest man I ever met in my life, my father included. He was just a lovely man and generous. And he also, which is what friendships ultimately do, they teach you things. And Ray taught me something that I will never forget. And Ray taught me that what a friendship means is that I will do everything that I can for you that's possible within my grasp and within my powers, unless you come between me and something I want. And then bets are off. And if you know that about someone, then you don't expect them to do that, and then that is the makings of a real friendship, because that's real politic there. And Carver was that way. You know, if you were standing in the way of him getting at a donut or a literary prize or anything like that, you just better get out of the way. And then I had lots of other friendships too. Mostly they turn out to be friendships through the agency of one kind of book or another. You know, I have a friend, Blake Morrison, in the UK, lives in London, who wrote a wonderful book about his father, which was very useful to me as I was writing this book, Canada. And then I have lots of friends who over the years have, well, I shouldn't say lots. No, not lots of friends. I have a few friends who have become not my friends anymore because of perfidious behavior of some kind or other. And it's well known that I have thin skin and that I like to fight. So there have been some casualties along the way.
And yet you seem like the most charming, affable fellow. I know the areas not to bring up, and they'll come towards the end.
We'll get those out of the way. Yeah. I'll chase you off the stage.
Yeah. And what about your non-literary friends? You have like people, I don't know, people in marketing, hang around with any real estate agents?
Well, you know, I live in a little village in Maine, and there aren't any literary friends there. So I am friends with the guy who sings in a band and also runs a charter service for fishing, and he takes me fishing. And I'm a bird hunter, and I go with the guy who also does the lawn service for our house. And but on the other hand, I moved to Maine not for a social life. I had a social life elsewhere in New Orleans, and I moved to Maine not to be alone, but just so I didn't have to worry about who I was going to have dinner with. I was going to have dinner with no one. Well, I was going to have dinner with she wasn't there. She stayed in New Orleans for about 5 years.
So you were alone in Booth Bay?
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't
the dogs?
The dogs. I had a dog or two, yeah. I don't have any literary friends up there. And the truth is that as you get older, I say me, as I get older, your friends turn out to be books, in the sense that your friends write books and you read them, and your friends probably live elsewhere, and I rarely see them. And so through the manifestations of their writing lives, that's how I keep in touch with them. Mm. Yeah.
It's not lonely?
No, there's a whole lot of difference between being alone and being lonely.
Yeah.
Solitude, you know, is okay. There's the internet.
Yeah, there's Facebook.
Yeah, that's not so bad, really. And emailing someone, that's all right.
It sounds, in fact, very, very attractive.
It is. That's why I moved up there, because it was very attractive.
You have, as you mentioned, you've lived in a lot of places. New Orleans, New Jersey, New York. You got some problem with California?
I do, actually. Yeah? Yeah, I just hate it. I would rather do anything than go there.
Really?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Something un-American lives out there. I don't know what it is. Every time I go there, I feel like everybody's thinking that I've just done something wrong, and so I just don't go there.
Really?
Yeah. Everything is quite correct there, and I'm just not that kind of correct sort of person.
Yeah, that's interesting. You lived in Paris as well,
I did.
And obviously that was much more to your life.
That was much more.
How long were you there for?
Oh, altogether 3 years. Not very long, not nearly long enough, but yeah.
À quel arrondissement?
It
means which area in French?
La 14e.
That means the 14th. Merci. And I think we would dispense with.
Or as they say, at the Sofitel, bien sûr.
Oui. What drew you to Paris, and then what took you away?
Oh, come on! You know what drew me to Paris. The same thing that draws everybody to Paris. I mean, it's the most wonderful, particularly for sort of a dumbass kid from Mississippi to get to go to Paris was just something I couldn't have dreamed of, and to live there and to learn to speak French and to get along pretty well. Just, I don't know. I thought it was just one of the great, not an achievement, though it for me personally was an achievement, but just one of the great things in the world to do. Sure. And I hoped that if I went there, I could actually write something that was set there, and I did.
Which you did, yeah.
I did do. And so that was wonderful. I hope I live long enough to go back. Mm. Yeah.
I won't ask whether you'd like to live in Melbourne, because...
Well, you could ask them.
Yeah, you probably would.
I probably would.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It is. From the Sofitel, I see almost all of it.
You're on the 3rd or 4th floor?
I'm the 40th floor, and I really do see pretty much everything.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. You can out that way.
It has a nice rise to it.
Yeah, and a fall.
Well, no, but just until all of these hideous buildings were built in the middle, the sort of the level to which things were built when things were built is wonderful. It's very commodious and pretty too.
Be sure to mention all of that when you're in Sydney on Saturday to that audience. That will go over a treat. Have you ever been tempted to read any of the mega sellers of the age, the Da Vinci Codes, the 50 Shades?
No, I haven't ever been tempted to read those things, but not out of a sense of no ethical reasons. Just because I'm such a slow reader, I don't think it would stand up to that kind of slow reading. No pun intended, but I just don't think I would get enough out of it, because I pore over sentences when I read, because I'm dyslexic, and so I try to read things that poring over will reward. Yeah,
and you're quite right. They don't. I fell victim to the Da Vinci Code mania of whenever it was, and because I was just so curious to find out why, it had sort of overwhelmed Earth, and so I didn't buy it. I borrowed it from the library just to deny Dan Brown that PLR.
If I could read the Da Vinci Code in an evening, I would. No, I couldn't. But it's like Larkin, who said he would go to China, but he wanted to come back the same day.
Yeah. And so you want to have a long shower afterwards, after both experiences. If you weren't a writer, Richard, what do you think you would be? What would you prefer to have been?
I'd be retired by now.
Yeah, true.
Oh, well, I wanted to do so many things when I was young that I didn't really get to do. I was in the Marine Corps. I went to law school. I almost took a job with the CIA. I had all kinds of sort of right-wing aspirations, but none of them worked out. Maybe that's how you get to be a liberal. All your right-wing aspirations don't work out. But I wouldn't be doing anything now, for sure, if insofar as writing is doing something. Thoreau said that a writer is a man who, having nothing to do, finds something to do. That's kind of, I don't know what I would have done. I hope it would have been something easy, though.
Yeah. Like, what about being a ball player, for instance? Would you like to have done that?
Oh, I would have loved to have done it, but just like you, I wasn't good enough. I tried to. Well, we talked about this. This wasn't a casual slash against him.
Just a little.
I played a lot. I actually. A small anecdote. I had a coach named Johnny McDaniel in Jackson, Mississippi, and I was on the baseball team, and over the holidays when we were supposed to be getting into shape and practicing, I went off to my grandparents' house in Little Rock, and when I came back after Christmas, and you have to do this all year long, I noticed that I was off the team. And so I went to him and I said, Coach Mack, I said, I see my name's not on the roster anymore. He said, Ford, I was afraid I was going to have to play you. So at my 50th high school reunion, he was a sort of a big, muscular guy, burr-headed guy, nitwit. And I saw him at the 50th high school reunion because some of the teachers came back. And he was now a small, wizened little man who kind of doddered around, and I just thought to myself, yes! Play me now.
Nice anecdote. In a recent interview, you said that for a writer, children make life needlessly hard. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that as a father of a 3-year-old, I can confirm that's
true, don't
very,
you? Yeah.
Very true.
Well, I don't have any children, and I always thought that I would... I've been married a long time, and I just saw at an early age I was having such a sort of a doddering time myself getting started that if I had children, I would never get started. But yeah.
Yeah. Look,
but you were started before you had children, so it's a whole different enterprise.
Yeah, and ended as a result of. Lucky I got
got those books written while you could.
Yeah, really. Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about writing. You once said, this is a very wise and interesting quote, I think, a lot of people could be novelists if they were willing to devote their lives to their own responses to things.
Yes, I do think that's true.
It's an interesting idea.
I mean, you know, monkeys can write novels. Many monkeys do write novels, as far as I can tell. So I don't think it's rocket science or brain surgery or anything like that.
No, but I do think a lot of people don't spend anywhere near enough time, if any time at all, examining their responses to things.
That's right.
And you know, most people just sort of live an unexamined life. I guess that's why most people don't write books. Although, not to say that.
And thank God, because then maybe those people are readers. I mean, I know lots of people who lead unexamined lives and are the happiest people in the world. So maybe I envy them even, but for a person whose natural bent is to brood, which is what I naturally do, being a novelist is almost sort of a godsend because you have something to do with those brooding nights. You get up and turn on the light and scribble stuff down that you're brooding about and stick them in books. And you know, it's true generally about being a novelist. You have something to do with almost every single thing you hear.
Yeah.
Whereas most people's lives are like all of our lives. Their minds are chaotic. Things are whipping through your mind all the time, and all you want them to do is go away. Whereas for me, I want to write them down.
But apprehend them into some kind of, you know, shape.
That's right.
You can't just sort of spatter all of that out. And
No.
that's part of, you know, why I think most people don't write books, because it's quite hard. That said, 50 Shades of Grey.
Well, I never thought it was hard. I mean, I guess I would never have thought I was capable of doing anything hard. I just think, you know, again, it's me having nothing to do and finding something to do. Plus, I wouldn't say that anything that I did was hard if I chose to do it. I would only say that something was hard if I was forced to do it. Like if I was in prison, for instance, and I had to do something very unlikable, I would say, "Oh, this is too hard." But to say I'm going to take the next 3 years of my life because I can't see anything else to do and write a book, well, you chose it.
Are you a note taker?
An inveterate note taker.
Right now?
No, I'm not going to make a note right now, but I'm just going to show you that I can whip it out if I have to.
Looks like an Irish passport.
Well, I wish it was.
What does your daily routine consist of when you're hard at work?
Get up at between 5:30 and 6 and do whatever I want to do until 8:30. And then go down, work in a little boathouse, which is converted so that it's a study, down by the ocean. And I go down there about 8:30 and stay till 12:30 and then resume life and then go for 2 or 3 hours and then go back about 3:15 to 5. And it's during that time when I sort of plot out the things that I think I'm going to do the next morning. So it's fairly routine. And when I'm working on a book, that's 365 days a year.
Yeah.
Christmas and New Year's and my birthday too. So but that's not, that will go on for 2 or 3 years, and then there will be long slack periods in which I don't do doodly squat.
And has the way that you've worked changed over the course of your career?
Well, it had to change in 1981 because I had written 2 books which nobody had read and did not get even weren't become paperbacks. That was at a time in publishing when you could have turned a snow tire into a paperback, but I couldn't turn these 2 books into paperbacks. So I had to figure out a whole new way to find my A game, as it were. And so then I started figuring out how I had to do it, and I've done it that way ever since, which is to spend a year accumulating material and making a big compendious notebook out of that material with dividers for characters' names and dividers for where the book takes place, and then study that stuff for months and months at a time without trying to write. And then finally, but when it gets to be clear to me that I'm avoiding writing and so that I'm studying instead of writing, then I start to try to find a first sentence. And that's the way I've done things since '82, actually, the same way. Yeah, I think I probably am a little more assiduous than I used to be, but maybe that's just an illusion. I don't know. Maybe I'm just older, and it seems that I'm more assiduous.
It's good to be assiduous. This time is going very...
But we're having fun, though.
Yeah, I'm loving it. I thought there were going to be long pockets of silence.
No, I wasn't going to permit that.
No. In the case of both Canada and Independence Day, you had the title in place before you began work?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And did that help? That sort of... It was like a guiding light for you?
It was kind of a guiding light for me. I mean, what I normally do is look in my notebook over a period of about 10 or 15 years and to see just what I've been thinking about for that period of time. And in my notebooks, I found the word independence turning up all the time. I didn't know why, but it let me know that I was somehow interested in independence. Likewise with Canada. I found Canada turning up in my notebooks, and I thought, well, this means to me that you are interested in this. And so what that means, if you're interested in it, then you have to put it in play. That is to say, you have to write a book that's either called Canada or called Independence Day, and that word turns up in what people think about and what they are talking about. And what it means to me, that beyond, is that I'm trying to write something that rethreads what conventional intelligence thinks these words contain and hold. And so that's how that's what I get cued to what I'm going to do. Sort of see what I've been thinking over the last few years. One
thing that you were thinking back in the early 80s, there's a glancing reference to Canada in one of the stories in Rock Springs. Like, it might be communists, where a character says, nothing interesting happens up there.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah, I made some sport with Canada for a long time, and I made some sport with it in those Frank Bascom books, too. But the Canadians, they're wonderful. They think it's great when you make a little... As long as it's not nasty,
they're just happy to be mentioned.
Sport. Yeah, but I sort of said some funny things about Canada, but they didn't make anybody not like me, or at least if they did not like me, they didn't tell me, which is the same as not liking me as far as I'm concerned.
Did your American publishers try and talk you out of calling it Canada?
Assiduously.
Yeah. And I imagine you resisted vociferously.
I did. My agent said to me, she said, Jesus Christ, she said, she has a very high-pitched voice. She said, Jesus Christ, she said, do you know what people think of an American when they think about Canada? I said, no, tell me. She said, grass growing. And I said, well, that may be true for you. I said, but the whole reason for writing this book and calling it that is to sort of reverse that notion of what Canada is about.
Do you think, quite seriously, do you think it might have affected sales, though? I mean... Yeah, like that sort of the humorous reaction of Stephen Colbert,
Well, it's been on the bestseller list for 7 weeks, and I've never had a book be on the bestseller list for 7 weeks, and so it's affected sales in that way. But I also changed publishers too, and that made a difference too. I think I was with Alfred Knopf, which is a wonderful publisher, and I had a wonderful editor. But that all just kind of came to its own natural end, and so then I went over to a little imprint of HarperCollins called Echo, where I didn't have to always be second in the soup line to Cormac and Toni Morrison.
Yeah. I think you've pushed them aside.
No, I don't want to push them aside.
All right.
I don't want to push anybody aside. One of the great things about writing novels is that it is not a competitive sport. You are happy when your colleagues do well, and it's encouraging when you read a good book. Was that a pregnant silence?
No. I'm just trying to think of which of these
column
terrific
C.
questions.
Column C.
Well, let's talk about. You're a Pulitzer Prize winner, I believe.
Damn right.
According to Wikipedia. What are your thoughts on the committee's decision not to award a prize this year?
Well, I thought it was just a retreat from their responsibilities is what I thought. We're not, the way in which the Pulitzers are arrived at is because I've been one of the judges. 3 people read about 450 books in a year's time. And, of course, you don't read all of the books, because if you read 100 pages of a book and you think, this book isn't any good, then you don't read any further. But then these 3 judges recommend 3 books to what is called the Pulitzer Committee, and that committee is made up of newspaper editors and some pointy-headed intellectuals and some, college professors and some muckety-mucks in various places. And then these people all ostensibly read the books. Of course, they don't read the real long ones. And then they decide. And that's their only job, really. Here, we give you 3 books. We've read 500. We give you 3, and all you have to do is just say thumbs up to one of these books. Well, that's what they didn't do. And so I thought, well, you guys are just a bunch of dogs, You shouldn't be judges, because every year when Pulitzers are announced, there's always a great variety in the kinds of books that win, and you have to, when you win it yourself, you have to understand that if I win the Pulitzer Prize, it just means that Philip Roth didn't have a good year that year. It's always that way with any prize. If you win a prize, somebody else probably should have won it. And they just can, that's okay. So these things per year are quite relative. When I won, a friend of mine who's an academic sent me a list of all of the awful writers who had won. He said, now pridefully you can see your name in with them. and I understand that. So when I think about the judges, the Pulitzer Board not doing that, they seem to have somehow become absolutists about these things. And I don't think that's their job. Maybe they need to be told what their job is.
Or just give it to Train Dreams, which is one of the 3 in contention.
It was. It was a short little book, but they could have read that. Yeah, I think. Yeah. And Dennis is quite a good writer. Yeah, indeed. As it happens, yeah.
Indeed.
So that's my view on the Pulitzers. But I think that one of their jobs is to try to encourage literature wherever they find it, and they find it right in front of them.
Yeah, and it does no encouragement.
Does no one any good, and particularly at a time in America when publishers are working hard to make serious books work, and everybody's, all boats would have risen on that tide.
Yeah. I completely agree. Now, you're, I guess, a bit famous for your reaction to reviews, but do you really stop yourself from reading them?
No, absolutely. Absolutely, I do.
You mostly get very, very good reviews.
Well, I've got a few quotes here. Not always. I mean, mostly. There have been lots of times. When I quit reading them was in 1990, when I published a little book called Wildlife, which I thought was a can't-miss book. And you should never think that about your books. But I did for some reason. I thought it was a really good book. And then people didn't particularly like it. And it grieved me and broke my heart in a way. And my wife said to me, she said, you could make this all a lot better if you just didn't read reviews. And I thought, well, isn't it my job to read reviews? Because I write these books and then people write about them. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? And she said, no, it's not. So I thought, well, I'll try that next time. And I never went back to it.
You're really missing out on some glowing superlatives.
But Sean, I feel like, if you're not going to read the bad ones, you shouldn't read the good ones. And it is also the case that when there have been good ones that I might have snuck into the room and peeked at, they piss me off just as much as the bad ones do somehow. So there's no winning for me in that, Yeah. Because if they praise something, they don't praise it enough.
Yeah. And they'll get little details wrong, which
they get little details wrong, right? Or they, yeah. So I think it's made my life immensely easier not to read reviews because they aren't meant for me. I mean, some are meant to hurt me, I feel like. So I'm happy not reading those. And I have very thin skin.
Yeah, well, you're a writer.
Well, I have thinner skin, I think, than most people do.
We're going to get to a reading, brief reading shortly. This is the last bit because I think it's worth. There are probably some aspiring writers in the audience or on stage.
On stage, we both are aspiring writers.
In 1996, you said that your first advice to an aspiring writer is to talk yourself out of it if you can possibly do it.
Yes.
Because you'll probably fail and make yourself miserable doing it. And obviously, it's kind of odd me sitting here because, as I've mentioned in many ways, it was your work that encouraged me to become the failed writer that I am. And yet, had I been privy to that information, I might have talked myself out of
do you
becoming a writer and not be sitting here telling you this.
It'd be our loss.
It's a strange existential
dilemma,
conundrum.
Yeah, it is.
So it's sort of like thanks and thanks for nothing.
And you're welcome for both.
There's a passage in Richard's new book.
Big orange book.
Yes, big maple orange book, Canada, that I'm really that I just thought was absolutely lovely, and I'm thrilled to ask Richard to read it out for us. After which we'll take some questions if that's agreeable to everyone.
I'll be glad to.
Does anyone not want to do that? Okay.
You can if you don't want to. If you don't mind, I don't like to sit down and read. It seems disrespectful.
So, I think there's the microphone. I don't want to hold it.
I'll just stand behind this thing here.
I can hold it for you.
No. You've done enough. This is, I don't know where this is. This is from the end of chapter 45. Other days, I simply walked up to the little commercial row, the businesses that had once thrived along the highway, facing across the hardtop to the pool elevator and the CP tracks. From my bed, I'd often heard freight cars late at night, the big diesels gathering and surging, the wheel springs squeaking, the brakes and sleepers crying out. It was much the way I'd experienced it in my bedroom in Great Falls. No trains stopped at Partreux. The elevator was long emptied. Sometimes I'd be jolted awake and would step outside in the chill, moonlit dark, barefoot in my jockeys, hoping I could see the northern lights, which my father had talked about, but that I'd never seen in Great Falls and never saw in Partreux. The blocky shadows of the grain cars and the tanker cars and gondolas swayed and bumped along, sparks cracking off the brakes, lights dimmed and yellow in the caboose. Often a man stood on the rear platform, the way I'd seen photographs of politicians giving forceful speeches to great crowds, staring back at the closing silence behind him, the red tail light not quite illuminating his face, unaware anyone was watching. But when I inspected the little commercial frontages, an empty pocket-sized bank, a mason's building of quarried stone from 1909, the Atlas shoe store with shoes scattered inside, a shadowy pool hall, a gas station with rusted glass top pumps, an insurance office, a beauty parlor with 2 silver hair dryers pushed over and broken apart, the floors littered with bricks and broken furnishings and merchandise racks, the light dead and cold, the busted back doors letting the damaging elements in, all the establishments emptied of human uses. I found I always thought of the life that had gone on there, not of life cast aside, and not as opposed to what I'd first thought, like a museum at all. I had more positive views, which made me feel that although I hadn't been taught to assimilate, a person perhaps assimilated without knowing it. I was doing it now. You did it alone, and not with others or for them. And assimilating possibly wasn't so hard and risky and didn't need to be permanent. The state of mind conferred another freedom on me and was like starting over, or, as I've already said, becoming like someone else, but someone who was not stalled but moving, which was the nature of things in the world. I could like it or hate it, but the world would change around me no matter how I felt. Good.
Thank you. If there are, actually, I can kick things off. I solicited a question from the internet from a real-life Frank Bascombe, who is a fan of your work. He's a doctor in England, a big fan of the Frank Bascombe trilogy. And he would like to know why you gave Frank Bascombe specifically prostate cancer.
Well, I had to give him something because I wanted it to be about something that he had to get over. Most of the ways that I have conceived of Frank from the beginning of my life of writing about him had to do with him trying to find ways to be happy. And so I have had to invent hurdles, impediments for him to overcome so that he could then emerge in some ways affirming of life. And I was terrified of getting prostate cancer. And, you get to be a certain age in your life, and your life is just basically composed of a trip to the doctor followed by a long worrying period followed by another trip to the doctor. And so I thought, well, I'm going to exercise this in myself in some way by putting it in a book. But I didn't do that. I only made myself even more almost schizophrenic about it, and until finally, and this did kind of work out in the short term anyway, I quit going to the doctor altogether. And in fact, I have at the end of this, I thank my urologist.
I noted.
For being such a capital guy, because I said to him, now, Jeff, I'm going to tell you that if I have to come to the Mayo Clinic and have a PSA test and I find out that it's not good, I won't be able to finish my novel. He said, so I said, so I'm not coming. And he said, I wish all of my patients had that kind of resolve. That's a short answer, a long answer to a short question, but it is nonetheless the truthful one.
Well, I'm sure both Franks are grateful.
In a way, art is eternally redemptive.
Over to you, audience. I think the common way is to raise your hand.
Right behind you. Excuse me. You can do that second. Right?
No, specifically for you, I often wonder when artists start to write a book if you actually know how it's going to end, or if it evolves while you're in the process of writing.
Do you want to take that one?
No. Well, I could, but I won't.
I always know where a book is going to end spatially. I know that I thought my book was going to end in Windsor, Ontario, which is this book here, which it did do. I thought that The Lay of the Land was going to end in Minneapolis, which it did do, or at least in Minnesota. So I have a kind of spatial target for where I want it to end, because somehow or other I have a notion of a scene or of a landscape which gets described. So my book is always heading toward that general place in space, but how it gets there is fortuitous, really, and actually what it brings to bear on where it arrives is also very fortuitous, but it is an act of faith that I will arrive there, and that if I do, I will have the goods to deliver at that point, or I won't arrive there. I mean, my way of operating is that if my book is broken, or if there's something really defective about it, I won't be able to go forward, and that I'm intense enough about it, that I'm praising it all the time, that I just can't get anywhere if the book is sort of not whole. So if I think to myself, I am at the end of my book, I have somehow arrived at the last gesture of the book, I feel this great sense of freedom that I could almost write anything I wanted to write. I mean, it doesn't matter what I say now, because the book is basically behind me and done. Yes, ma'am.
It's a question about Canada.
Yes, ma'am.
Early in the novel, after Dell talks to his parents, talks about his parents being destined to rob the bank, and this is a quote, no matter what they believe about themselves or how they were raised. He then goes on to say, and these are words that have really reverberated for me after I finished reading the novel, he goes on to say, I find it impossible not to think this way. That is, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting here, about destiny as the explanation.
Yes.
He says, I find it impossible not to think this way because the sense of tragedy would otherwise be overpowering for me.
Yes.
Those words for me really reverberate when I've closed the novel, and when I dip into it again and reread it, for me, they're really a crucial comment from Dell. I wondered if you would comment on that statement for Dell. The sense of tragedy would otherwise be overpowering for me.
It's a rationalization that he performs regarding his parents, and it is, I guess, a way of paraphrasing it would be to say, if I thought that these events fell upon my parents unwanted, if these events fell upon them for no good reason at all, it would be more than I could bear. So that what he does in his act of rationalization is assign a certain kind of agency to them, at least an agency which destiny in some ways describes. So that's what it is. It would be for him too much to aver that terrible things happen to undeserving people. Do you want to say something else?
Yeah, but I think...
You think I'm wrong about that? No. You might be right. I might be wrong about it. I mean,
But the edges of Dell's story. It seems to me this is a tragedy about Dell and a tragedy about America too. I mean, when he talks about his mother's letter, he says it was more than sadness. That is what I think is really profoundly moving in this novel, is the sense that around the edges, outside, in a sense, Dell's actual consciousness is that sense of tragedy. So,
well, maybe for me, tragedy. It's a matter of vocabulary, nomenclature. Maybe for me, tragedy and sadness are not exactly synonymous. Yeah. Right.
The tragic nature, not only of what happened to his parents, but his own losses. And so he constructs the whole sense that he has that he can't have, he has to cross a border.
Right.
It's
an involved conversation, and I would be happy to have it with you if we can. I guess what I think is that, opposite to what you're saying, and apropos too, is that if you believe, I don't happen to believe this myself. If you believe that around the periphery of life is great sadness, there's certainly some for everybody. We still cope with it by creating a world inside of which we can live, a kind of artifice. If you've ever read a wonderful little book by Frank Kermode called A Sense of an Ending, it's a book worth reading about that very subject.
There's a question up here.
Hi. Hello.
Hello. I used to read 800-page books. Then I started reading short stories.
Yes.
And I loved your short stories, but they've had a positive and a negative effect on me. The positive effect is I enjoyed them. The negative effect, I decided I want to meet people, like the people, to the extent that I could, in some of your stories.
Yes.
And so I started becoming much more a strange people person, or
a
strange to me people person. I've had some moderate success in that. The problem is now I find it very difficult to read fiction.
Oh, I
Any
see.
kind. I can read about the fiasco in Iraq. I can read about terrible things by McCall in Afghanistan. But when someone gives me a fictional book to read, it saddens me in a way, but I just find it so difficult. Though I did enjoy your stories so much. Is there a cure, some sort of fictional... fictional inoculation that you can get rid of the real-life disease and get into a cerebral life instead of becoming an old action man?
Well, I think art is in a kind of a constant tussle with fact. Artifice is always struggling against the sort of omnipotence, the omnipresence of factual life, which we're in all the time, and so I have a little apothegm which says that if loneliness is the disease, the story is the cure. And so you're just not lonely. And so I wouldn't want to wish that on you. So I think, you know, whatever hunger brings anyone to art, it is not a hunger that you are succumbing to these days. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I realize that as a complaint, it's a somewhat insincere complaint, but your addiction or fascination or involvement with fact is satisfying what you need, you know. Please, these things require second words.
The problem with that is that it's true, but there's still that sense of guilt that you don't want that thing that was once so important to you, and you feel somehow you're missing out.
I see. Well, don't feel guilt about anything. Least of all the discretionary aspects of your life.
Are there more up there, or?
Well, there's a gentleman, lady here. I can't see you. I can't tell women from men at this age.
Last time I looked, it was a lady.
Well, I can't see that far.
I've got a question about your views about the future of the short story. You mentioned Ray Carver, one of the great short story writers, and you yourself are committed to the short story. But in current publishing trends, what's the future? What do you see?
I think it has a very bright future. The only thing that would threaten short story writing, I think, now is what has threatened it in the past, and that is that there are no magazines of first resort. I mean, there's in America there are a few, so to say, slick magazines where you can find short story. Harper's, Atlantic, The New Yorker. Many magazines have gone away, but I think as far as publishers are concerned, you just look around, and I mean, Julian Barnes is writing wonderful short stories. Alice Munro goes on writing wonderful short stories. There are a lot of good short story writers in America. I don't see publishers in any way in America backing away from publishing short stories at all. This is a gentleman standing there.
Hello, Mr. Ford.
Hello.
In The Sports Writer, you said that for your life to be worth anything, you must sooner or later face the possibility of terrible, searing regret, though you must also manage to avoid it or your life will be ruined. Yeah. It's something that's always struck me, and I just wondered that since writing that, have you ever been faced with any regrets, and have they
regrets in general? Yes, I've been faced with some regrets, but never regrets that completely sunk my ship. And so that's, I guess, what I mean. I don't know anybody is going to get through life without feeling terrible, searing regret, but you have to, in some ways, let it not completely bring you down. I mean, sure, of course, you do things you wish to hell you hadn't done, thought things you wish you hadn't thought, but you have to have some capacity to get beyond those things. I just wrote a line in my notebook the other day that I sort of would assign to Frank Bascom if he existed anymore, and it was, I think the nature of the line is, the best thing about life is that things end, and it just seemed like a nice line. And in a way, it is consoling to me that you can do bad things and you can take account of them and take responsibility for them, and that some of that feeling of regret will actually end. I don't know if there are things that one does which, when you look back on them, make you wince. Oh God, I did that, or that. Maybe you can't ever quit wincing about those things, but you can quit preying on them, I think. Thank you. And by the way, Frank said that. I didn't say that.
Can we take one from up here?
I've just come off reading A Multitude of Sins, and one of the things that struck me about that was that a lot of the characters were in a tug-of-war between wanting happiness as quick as they could get it and doing the right thing. And I just wondered, in both your novels and short stories, how important was it to you that your characters were finding ethical ways of living?
Well, it must be important just by the evidence of those stories. I mean, I don't think I would have ever been smart enough to start out writing a book of stories or a novel with that as my goal. To say it's important that my characters find an ethical way of living. 'Cause I think that would have probably shut my little operation down right away. Because my whole sense of ethics, which is why I'm such a reader of Emerson, is that ethics for me always start at ground level, and their consequences and their sense of importance radiate out toward what we understand to be ethical issues, but they're so grounded in human behavior that I don't think, from what I knew I was writing about and what the raw material of the stuff was, that I could have ever made the connection except through the agency of the story that I wrote. A story or a novel is a pretty hot little crucible when you're working on it. And so you distill out of that crucible all kinds of things, make yourself think all kinds of things, and actually sometimes become even smarter than you are by writing a story. So I wouldn't have gotten to that by any other means except through the agency of those stories. Thank you. Yes, sir.
It's clear both from your reading but also from each of your books how much you care about sentences.
Yes.
And in fact, I've noticed how they change between Independence Day and Wildlife, etc. And I wondered, were there anybody else's sentences that you're in love with? Because I always go to your books because I love the sentences.
Thank you.
Are there other people's sentences that, you
yes,
relish, envy, or whatever?
Naipaul to me writes the most interesting sentences of anybody writing these days. And Alice Munro, to me, writes the most interesting sentences because they're so unpredictable. They manage to be readable, and they're often quite long, but you never get lost in them. And they're always, to read through one of their sentences, and I was about to say something really stupid, so I won't say that, but it's just such a wonderful experience to read a Naipaul sentence. And I've been reading the Enigma of Arrival, which is another book I recommend strongly to you, simply for that. He's not narrating in the first 100 pages, which is what I've been reading. He's not narrating anything that seems of great moment. It's just sort of what whoever's narrating this book sees. But the sentences are so glorious. I mean, they're just beyond anything that I've seen in a long time. So yeah, those two are people who, I don't want to give you a list of 25 people, but those two, because they're so accessible to you, would be people I would go to over and over again. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. My question is to do with your views of your readers. It seems a lot of people who've spoken have found reading your books to be quite a transformative experience, and certainly it was so for me when I first read The Sports Writer. And I just wonder, is that something you think about? Do you think about the effect that reading your books might have on a reader, not just in the sense of whether or not they enjoy it or think it's good, but whether or not it might change the way they think about themselves or the things that happen to them in a really profound and sort of permanent way?
I think probably everybody who writes books and everybody who reads books ought to carry around with them some kind of definition of what great literature is. You should be, if somebody were to say to you, or to say to any of us, all right, what do you think literature is? You ought to be able to answer that like that, it seems to me. And there's a line of F.R. Leavis's in an essay that he wrote about D.H. Lawrence. And Leavis said that literature is the supreme means by which we renew our sensuous and emotional life and learn a new awareness. I'll say that again. Literature is the supreme means by which we renew our sensuous and emotional life and learn a new awareness. I want to do that every single time I write a book. I want to be able to write a book that will cause that to happen to someone. And not even that they get to the end of the book and they like it. They don't have to like it, but for me to feel successful, I want them to get to the end. I want them to read every word. And once they read every word, then I think I will have had my best chance to do that, to perform that whatever it is, that injunction of Lewis's. And so, yeah, that is what I'm trying to do. Because, you know, the first book I ever finished of any consequence was Absalom, Absalom. And I read it when I was 19, and it did that for me. And I thought to myself, literature, for me, struck a certain beat which made life feel more complete than it had felt when I was just living it. And so that's what I thought was important.
We've got to take maybe the last two.
Thank you.
Last two?
Yes, last two.
Mr. Ford, first sentences are important, and the first sentence to Independence Day is this just gloriously beautiful thing with words like languorous and, I don't know,
if I were James,
soft balm.
If I were James Elroy, I could repeat it, but I can't.
It is just this beautiful thing. I was just wondering, how long did it take you to write that, and did you sort of spit polish that one till you couldn't get it any better, or did it just flow and did you just walk away and just pop open a bottle of champagne after that and say, that's beautiful?
I misremember things about that, and I somebody asked me about the beginning lines of Canada about a month ago, and I said, well, that's pretty much the way I wrote it. And when I got off the stage, my wife Christina said to me, that is absolutely not true. She said, you slaved over that line for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I'm not sure I'm very reliable about that. I mean, I can't think of the words, but I can sort of hear the rhythms of the sentence, and I think to myself, it seems so natural. I must have just written it that way the first time. But I probably, you know, like everything else that I do, I went over it about 65 times to try to get it right before I would ever go forward, because I think, you know, when you start a book, the book is really going to go the direction that the first sentence kind of ordains. And so I want to be sure that I'm in complete control of where that ordination is taking me. And so I'm quite certain to the extent that writing is a labor, I'm quite certain I labored over that somewhat. And I hope that feels consoling to you. One, yes, sir. Just hit it on the wall. It'll work.
Richard, do you think you could write a book, or your next book, and call it America, and help us understand what is happening in the United States and to Americans?
Well, I think if I were to write another book such as a Frank Bascom book, I would have to do that. I don't think it would be worth writing if I didn't try to do that. And up until now, when I've been thinking about all of the things that have happened since I wrote The Lay of the Land, it hasn't seemed to me to be encapsulatable in any way to me at all, what's happening to America these days, because, I mean, we have a wonderful president in America. We're fortunate to have a wonderful president, and he is far from perfect. And he's done things which many of us who voted for him are shocked and surprised by, but we're all going to vote for him again. That's for sure. But everything else is just kaflooey to me. So you know, it would probably take an act of imagination, since acts of reportage don't seem to be doing it very well. But no, I would certainly think that was absolutely necessary to do. But at 68, I don't want to fall forward dead on my desk and with an unfinished book in front of me. I'd rather fall off my motorcycle or something like that. So the reason I don't undertake something like that or haven't contemplated it is just because I don't want to start something I can't finish. I've never started a novel I haven't finished. And so I'm thoughtful of that very fact. But thank you for proposing it. I take it seriously. And thank you all for these kind questions. I appreciate them. Thank you.